Hi there, and a very warm welcome to this week's quick tip, in which we are going to look at labels. So this is for you product viz artists that always have to render one product with multiple labels attached. So in this week's video, we are going to look at techniques to only render once, but get a multitude of labels to the product. So without further ado, let's grab your coffee and let's keep going. Alright, as always, let's have a look what we are going to do today. As you can see, I have prepared a small product viz scene here. Since this is a labeling tutorial and not a lighting tutorial, I didn't put too much effort into lighting, so nothing to write home about. But back to topic, we are going to use Octane's multipass and internal compositing system to put on some labels on the bottle. And as you can see, we have multiple labels in one go. And if you stay to the end, there's a very nice bonus using Fusion Studio. Alright, let's see how we can put this all together now. Before you getting all hyped up, there's a small disclaimer or a big one, dependent where you're coming from. Since this is also a comp technique, it inherits all the problems that compositing comes with. For example, that the label change doesn't reflect in the reflection or it won't show up in refractions. Also, it can have problems when you have blurry areas, then seams might show up. I just wanted you to know the limitations, but with those in mind, let's keep going. And welcome to our base scene. So this is the scene we're going to build at to get it to the same level as the scene we just looked at. Let's of course start with the label material by going to materials and then choose a glossy material here. Call it label and then go into the nodes here. So for this tutorial, I like to keep the material aspect of the material rather simple. So the only thing we're going to do is go to basic, set this to GGX in the reflection BSDF, and then go to the roughness and set it to 0.375. Here we go. So next what I'm going to do is just drag in our texture, so one of those labels, and then connect it to the diffuse and also assign the material here, and then you should be able to see something. As you can see, the scaling is a little bit off, so we are going to rectify that by the UV transform here and then disable the aspect ratio and go with a 0.625 here. And there we go. By the way, I invented this Onyx brand and designed the labels this morning to have some labels at hand. Let me know if you like those. Now, very obviously, I can hear you ask, what about the other labels? How can one label share a place with others? And this is where custom AOVs and the capture AOV node comes in. So let me bring in the other labels and then go on a small tangent because there's something rather important when working with realistic materials. So for example, if we plug in the black material in here, you can see the dark tones here are rather dark, or vice versa, if we plug the white label in here, then the white is rather bright. So what we have here right now is the pure print data that is in reality printed on some substrate, for example, a foil or paper. And therefore this substrate is altering the brightness levels of the print. So if we are going with the white example here, that would mean that it will reflect in a diffuse way 100% of the light, which never happens in reality. And vice versa with the black label, the black will absorb 100% of the light. The only difference here is that you can still see the reflection on top. Also, that never happens in reality. So to mimic the substrate, so paper or foil, I usually go with a range to map the range to be more alongside the realistic values that prints will have. So to get a more realistic behavior and emulate our substrate, I'm usually going with a range node. So let's bring in a range. And this is the second from the top here. Let's twirl it open so you can see it better and go through here. So what I will do is use this node to limit the dynamic range of the input texture by going to the output min and max and altering this value here. So for the output min, I'm going to 0.01, and for the output max, I'm going with 0.8. So what I do here, as you probably have expected, is bringing up the black levels and bringing down the white levels. So if we connect the texture again directly, you can see the black levels are much darker than with the range mapping, and same as with the white values. So the white is very bright here, and if we go through the range, then it looks much more integrated into the scene. But let's get to the star of the show, which can make all 3 or more textures occupy the same space in 3D. And this is, as I said before, the capture AOV. Well, I didn't intend to make a rhyme here. Let's actually bring in a capture AOV, and you can see it consists of 2 slots. And the topmost here is piping through what comes in directly to the material, while the lower one is writing it into the custom AOV. And you can choose those here. You can see that you have 20 at your hand, so you have a maximum of 20 labels that you can use. Actually, it's 19, and we will see the reason why soon. I want to keep the range here in, so what I'm going to do is get the black label here and set it to be the AOV output, and then set the AOV output to number 10, so I have a good indication where they start. Then what I'm going to do is do the same for the other textures, so just copy this portion here, and then do the same for the white one, so value in, and then instead of going directly to the material, of course, we want to go here. And then we're going to do that for the blue texture as well. And don't forget to put the AOVs into different numbers here, so 10, and then 11, and then 12 would be fine. Here we go. Okay, so finally, let's have a look where our custom AOVs have been stored into by going to the render settings, make sure it's Octane render settings, and then go to the render AOV group and open the AOV manager. We are searching for custom AOVs, so you can search custom, here we go, and then bring in 3 of those because we have 3 labels. Now, they are all set on ID 1, so what I want to do is bring in the IDs that I actually use, and those are 10 and 11 and 12 as we had it before set up in the shader. Here we go. And as we've done that, and you have to enable those AOV groups, they should be popping up here. Nice. Oh, and I just noticed our other labels are still stretched, so let's apply the same transform to them as to our blue label to get them looking the same. Before we close down this window, let's actually think about what we need to bring this all together. So we have a main pass with all our lightings, reflections, and so on, and then we have our 3 labels. To comp those labels over the main pass, we need some sort of alpha, and this is just another custom AOV, and also the reason why we have 19 and not 20 labels at our hand that we can use. But just comping the labels over the beauty is not giving us what we want, since those labels still need the lighting and the reflections on top. So what we need is a reflection pass and sort of a raw lighting pass to go with our AOVs. So let's go back inside our render AOVs and add a reflection pass. Here we go. We don't want to filter direct or indirect. A reflection is just enough. And for the raw lighting, we need a Irradiance. So Irradiance, here we go. And since we added this, let's have a look what they are looking like. So Irradiance is giving us the raw lighting without any textures, and then we have the reflection here. So now we have all the elements to build up our internal compositing. So let's do this. Wait a second, hold your horses, I was a little bit too fast. We are still missing the main mask of our labels. So what we need here is a Octane object tag. You get this by right-clicking Extensions, Octane object tag. Then go here to the object layer and set the custom AOV to, for example, 1. And then let's go to our AOVs one more time. Here we go. And add another custom. So let's just copy and paste that. And instead of the number 10, we're going with the number 1. And this should give us our mask. Here we go. Now we can go to compositing. It's comping time, and if you, for whatever reason, don't like the internal Octane compositor, you can go ahead and render out what we have right now, and then comp, for example, in AfterEffects or Fusion Studio. And spoiler, this is what we are going to do in the bonus later on. But let's first add the 3 outputs here, and to do that we need to go to our render settings again, but instead of the render AOV, we are going to the AOV groups here, and then add 3 inputs. Here we go. If you're familiar with my other tutorials on the topic, you know that those outputs are also a node-based system. To get to the nodes, you go to the render AOVs here. And if we spread them out a little bit more, you can see those are our output AOVs here. So let's start by bringing this out and do all of our comp for this and then copy it to the other ones once we are finished. What I want to do here is add a node, and this gives a whole list of things you can do, but I just want to add a beauty. Here we go. And then you can go to the out one and see what we're doing. As this should be our background, we want this to be in layer 1 rather than layer 2, and then in layer 2 layer our label on top. To get our nicely lit label, we need to layer together our Irradiance, then of course the label texture as well as the reflection. The layering can be done with a layer group, so let's bring this on and then layer the passes on top of each other here. I always have the feeling that Octane's internal compositing system is not quite finished, at least in Cinema 4D. So for now I can add layers, but I cannot add new nodes. But luckily there's a workaround. We just duplicate this node and then go to basics, and instead of layer group choose the render AOVs, then go back to parameters and then choose auxiliary Irradiance. So if we plug that in here now, if we can manage to do so, and then go back to out one, we can see our Irradiance. Let's actually bring in our label by adding another layer and then duplicate the Irradiance layer here. And instead of Irradiance, what we want to do is go to the custom and then custom 10, since this was our first label. And when we apply that, we only see the label. To get the lighting information for this, we need to multiply. What we need to do is scroll down the blending setting, and instead of physical normal, we go, as I just said, to multiply. So we have the lighting on our label. Let's actually do the same thing for our reflection. So let's add a layer, duplicate this node, and then go for a beauty surfaces reflection and then add it in here. Now this will look very strange. This is because we don't need a multiply but a add. And if we do so, we get the reflection for all of the scene, but also for our label. And as a last step, what we need is the custom AOV1 as an alpha to blend what we just did with the beauty. So add a layer yet again, and then we need a special one. So let's go and duplicate this one again, but let's go to basic, and then we need mask with layer group. Unfortunately, this is outside of the recording, but you can see it here. This basically takes an input and turns it into an alpha. So what we need to do here is yet again copy one of those layers, and then instead of a reflection, we need to go to the custom AOV1, which is our alpha, and plug it in here. And then there's a last step we need to do. Right now it takes the alpha from that, which it doesn't have. So what we need to tell the layer here is that it should choose the luminance. So it takes the luminance out of this channel and makes it into an alpha to distinguish between the beauty and our label. And as you can see, this is working rather perfectly. So let's tidy up the nodes a little bit, and then we can just copy them to the next output here. And the last thing we have to do to get the different labels on the out 2 and 3 is of course set the label here to the 11. So let's go to custom 11 and this one here to 12. Custom 12. Here we go. So now we have those different labels on their right spots. Before we visit Compositing Land with Fusion Studio, let's talk about the inefficiencies of this method in here. So we have a cube that is out of focus, and if I move that in front of the object, Of course, because it is out of focus, it has some blurry edges. And this is translated through the alpha and then brought into the labels in the compositing system and therefore creates some seams here. You can of course go to the render AOVs and to the mask especially and then play around with another layer group to get the mask here look a little bit more decent. But as said in the beginning, I just want you to know the limits of this technique so you're not disappointed if you try that. Before we venture off into Fusion land, a half-working bonus here. As you can see, we have sort of an ice cube, and this is also the reason I opted for a custom AOV instead of a cryptomat, because you can do a special thing here by including reflection and also refraction rays. Here we go. If we do that for all of our channels, you can see it's happening here. And if we go back to our out1 and then move the ice cube, you can see we can see our label actually through the refraction. For that, I needed to modify the stack here a little bit, so I have to add a refraction filter in there and set it to add. The limitation here is that we don't get shading through the refraction, because actually our Irradiance here is black. So if the Irradiance would work through the refraction, then we would have a totally working solution. But at least you can get somewhat there. And there are even other methods that I didn't mention that might come closer. And welcome to Fusion land. I rendered everything out as linear sRGB EXR, so no aces this time. So we have our diffuse, our mask, our irradiance, and our reflection. And if they're all looking rather dark, you are correct. This is since Fusion reads them in linearly. To get them displayed correctly, you can install Reactor. I have another tutorial where I go over this. And then go and install the sRGB curves here. When you enable that, you can at least watch your images in the right way, so the same way as we see them in the live viewer in Octane. So what's the big bonus reveal here? Basically, I want to show you something that works rather good, and this is how you can get labels on there without rendering them through Octane. So let's say your client says, well, that's fantastic, everything is fine, but we invented another label. Can you put it on your object, please? And you already have rendered everything out, and then you're there and say, can I do that in compositing somehow? Welcome back to Cinema 4D for a second, and the answer is sort of yes, and sort of because you need to go into the AOV manager one more time and add another pass, which is the UV coordinates. So without that, this wouldn't work. Whenever you have clients with label exchange projects, you can render this with it and then hope for the best. And if the client has some new logos, you can then go into compositing and exchange them there. Let's show you. Back in Fusion, I brought in the texture coordinates, and this is what it actually looks like, as well as the texture we want to wrap around the bottle with that. Other than in AfterEffects, where you need plugins to produce this effect, Fusion has its node for this. So if you go to Deep Pixel and then Texture, you can find it here. The setup is actually rather simple. First, you drag in the UV map, then you drag in the map that you want to distort along the UV map, and then display it and have the result right away. Now, since all of my textures are in sRGB color space, but this comp here is linear, what we need to do is linearize this texture, and we can easily do so by going to Import and flapping open both of those, then declare the color space and remove the gamma. Now, if you remember from before, we range mapped the input texture, so we need to do the same here, and we are going to use a color curves for that. So let's bring up the color curves and bring it into the stream here. And then what we need to do is just move those points. Since those are all linear values, same as in Octane, the same values apply. So we need to move up the point 0.01 and this point here down to 0.8. Here we go. Next, we do exactly the same thing as in Octane. So we multiply the Irradiance cache. To do so, we just have to set this to multiply and then display it, and also add the reflection. So again, a merge And then instead of doing anything here, we want to set burn in and retract the gain alpha. And this should have added the reflection. Yes. Now, before we fix the distortion, let's get the last couple of steps in the comp done by masking in the diffuse. So again, let's merge it and let's display it. So this is just the diffuse. What we actually need to do is get a mask. To actually use a black and white picture as a mask, we need a bitmap node. So let's call for a BMP. Here we go. And we get this in here and this in here. And then what we need to tell the bitmap node is that it's not going to take an alpha, but for example, the luminance. Here we go. It's inverted, but this doesn't matter. We can just invert it here. And therefore we have our label. You probably can see there are a couple of artifacts up here. So we can squish down the mask a little bit and resolve those. 0.75 seems to be a good value here. Alrighty, almost done. So last but not least, let's fix the distortion here by going back to the texture node. And since Fusion is working a little bit differently, you might remember that we used a value of 0.625 in Cinema 4D. In Fusion, we need to divide 1 by 0.625 to get the right distortion, or better yet, the right scaling. Also, this moved the logo to the left, so to get it back, we need to go to the offset and offset it half the value that we squished it, and this is 0.3. Here we go, so we have the same orientation as in our renders. And really, last but not least, you might have noticed that the label is a little bit aliased. So what I want to do here is to add a blur node in between the curves and the distortion here. So let's do this, blur, and then blur it by a pixel width of 1.5. And this makes it look a lot better. To be perfectly honest, it's still not as good as the render. Also, it doesn't respect depth of field because it doesn't know it exists in its little projection world here. But also, to be honest, this scene has an extraordinary amount of depth of field, so maybe you can get a better result when you have a real client project. And with that, I thank you for watching. I hope you learned something along the way. Let's thank those people who made this video possible. As always, my Patreons. Especially my €50 tier subscribers Shields Augustinen, Just a Frickin', and Leon Studio TV. Also, of course, a huge thank you for my €15 tier subscribers, for Die Thieves, Render King, Alessandro Bonchio, Alessio De Vecchi, Andrew Niehaus, BVR, Chris Fritchie, Christian Grajewski, DBMD, Erbe Plus Academy, George Luna, Graham Bucknell, Joel Muckemer, John Edward, Ludger, Muradan Axos, Nico Straub, Part 1 of 2, Kwok An Dang, Random Capybara, Raiko, Renato Marquez, Reshock, Shamus Johnson, Shiro 2049, Terry Wayne Ranson, and Yassin Rupp. Thank you all so very much for making it possible to produce those videos that you all enjoy. Hey, and welcome to the end of the Label Maker. Again, if you're still watching and listening, thank you very much for hanging on. I really appreciate it. If you want to show your support and please the algorithm overlords, you can post some sake, mostly because of the bottle shape and because I like Japan. And it reminds me of a relaxing time that I need right now after the record for this rather long video. Other than this, I wish you a good rest of the weekend, an amazing start into next week, and happy labeling. Bye.